All right, today we are diving into a really fascinating book by Rolf Dobelli called The Art of Thinking Clearly. You can think of it as a field guide to all the predictable and kind of funny mistakes our own minds make. So let's jump right in.
So Dobelli kicks things off with this huge question. Why is it that even the smartest people we know do really foolish things? Well, it turns out our brains, as brilliant as they are, come preloaded with certain blind spots. And these aren't just random mistakes. Dobelli says they are systematic, predictable errors in how we think.
And he has a name for these: cognitive errors. It's right here on the slide. They're systematic deviations from logic. Basically, they're the routine mistakes, the mental potholes we stumble into over and over again, and most of the time, we don't even see them coming. The whole book is pretty much a catalog of these very human glitches.
Okay, so let's jump in and explore some of these key blind spots. Dobelli's whole argument is that we can't really get rid of them completely. But just knowing they exist, that's a massive first step toward avoiding what he calls self-induced unhappiness. Okay, first step is a huge one: survivorship bias. Think about it. The media, our social feeds, everything, it's all focused on the winners. We see the rock stars, the best-selling authors, the CEOs who made it big. And this nonstop parade of success, it gives us a totally warped view of reality. And that really matters, because it makes us think our own odds of success are way, way better than they actually are.
And this chart just nails the point perfectly. For every single rock star you see on that stage, there's what Dobelli calls a graveyard of failed musicians. We're talking a cemetery that's thousands of times bigger than the stage, but it's completely invisible to us. Why? Because nobody writes news articles about the bands that never got a record deal.
And you see this bias playing out everywhere. You hear about the next Google, but not the 90% of startups that go belly up. You see the bestseller lists, but you don't see the mountains of manuscripts gathering dust. Even the stock market indexes, they only show you the winners, the companies that survived. All the failed companies just vanish. And if we don't see that silent majority of failures, how can we possibly assess risk correctly?
All right, so we've seen how we get a skewed picture by only looking at the winners, but what about when we just follow the crowd? Well, that leads us right into our next big thinking error: social proof.
And this quote from W. Somerset Maugham just sums it up, doesn't it? If 50 million people say something foolish, it's still foolish. This is the core of what's called social proof, or you might know it as the herd instinct. It's this deep, deep feeling that if a lot of other people believe something, then it must be correct.
And this is where it gets kind of wild, because that simple instinct, it's the engine behind so much real-world chaos. This very human need to just fit in is what fuels stock market bubbles and panics. It's why fashion trends take off. In a much darker example from the book, it's how a whole crowd can be whipped into a frenzy by a single propaganda speech. Our brain just tells us, hey, if everyone's running, you should probably run too. It's a mental shortcut that, in the modern world, often leads the herd right off a cliff.
Okay, so we've talked about pressure from the outside, from the crowd. Now let's turn inward and talk about a different kind of pressure: the pressure from our own past choices. This next mental trap shows how our own history can literally lock us into making terrible decisions for the future.
And Dobelli tells this story that I think we can all relate to. You're an hour into a movie and it is just awful. You lean over and say, "Come on, let's just go home." And the other person says, "No way, we're not throwing away $30. Sound familiar? That right there is the sunk cost fallacy.
And this chart just lays it out so clearly. The fallacy is that little voice in your head saying, "We can't stop now, we've invested too much." But the reality? That money is already gone. It's sunk. A truly rational decision requires you to completely ignore what you've already spent and focus only on the future. This is what keeps people pouring good money after bad into failing projects or staying in jobs they hate, all because of what they've already put in.
All right, let's get into our next one, which is all about how we filter information. And this one, well, some people call it the mother of all misconceptions. It's called confirmation bias. And, to put it simply, we just hate being wrong. So our brains do this really clever thing. We actively search for information that proves what we already believe, and we find ways to ignore, filter out, or explain away anything that might contradict us.
And it usually follows these 4 steps, this little trap our minds set for us. First, we form a belief. Then, we go looking for proof. And then, when we inevitably find something that contradicts our belief, we just dismiss it as an exception or a special case. And boom, our original belief gets even stronger. It's said that Charles Darwin was so aware of this trap that he forced himself to immediately write down any observation that went against his theories, because he knew his brain would try to forget it.
So how do you fight something that powerful? With this piece of advice, murder your darlings. It means you have to be absolutely ruthless with your own most cherished beliefs. You have to actively go looking for the evidence that proves you wrong. It's hard, it's uncomfortable, but it's the only way to think clearly.
So, we've covered just a handful of these mental tripwires: survivorship bias, social proof, sunk costs, confirmation bias. It can kind of feel like our own brains are out to get us, right? It's a bit daunting. So the big question is, what in the world can we do about it?
Well, the first thing Dobelli makes really clear is that there is no magic pill. You're not going to find a 7-step plan to an error-free life in this book. These thinking errors are just too deeply wired into our DNA. The goal isn't to become some kind of perfect logical robot. It's just to become aware of the traps so you can sidestep them a little more often.
And the key is to understand that we have these two different modes of thinking. There's our fast, intuitive, gut reaction thinking, and then there's our slow, deliberate, logical thinking. So the real art of thinking clearly is learning to know when your fast, gut reaction mind is about to lead you astray. It's about knowing when to hit the pause button and engage that slower, more rational part of your brain. And this brings us to what might be the most powerful idea in the whole book, and it's totally counterintuitive. It's the idea of subtractive thinking. See, the path to wisdom isn't about adding more knowledge or learning more complicated strategies. It's about subtraction. It's simply about learning to recognize and avoid the biggest, most common thinking mistakes.
And this final quote just wraps it all up perfectly. We need no extra cunning, no new ideas. All we need is less irrationality. Improving our lives doesn't require a stroke of genius. It just requires us to be a little less foolish, a little less predictably irrational, one decision at a time. So the real question to leave with is this: which of these errors do you see yourself falling for the most?